Hello everyone and welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm James Milan. We are in a familiar place with a familiar face. Our Arlington's police chief, Frederick Ryan, has graced us with his presence on multiple occasions over the years, and we have been much the richer for it. Alas, today is our final conversation with Chief Ryan, as the chief at least. We're looking forward to it, but of course the implications on the other side of that are bittersweet for many in the Arlington community. Anyway, we appreciate, as always, maybe even more than usual, the fact that you've carved out time to be with us today. Thanks very much, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's very nice to talk to you. On this occasion, it makes sense for us to, I think, look back on what has been I think, fair to say, a remarkable career for you. And I say remarkable in a couple of ways. One is longevity. You were mentioning to me before we went on camera that 20 years, or nearly 20 years, which has been your tenure as a chief, very long time for a chief of police. But also just the sea change that you have presided over in the department. So I'd like to talk about all that, but I'd like to start by just asking you to cast your mind back to, before you were a cop. Tell us how it was you got to decide, okay, this is what I want to do. Something you always knew. How did it go?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was a student at Arlington High School my senior year, and I had a law class that I absolutely loved. The teacher was Mr. Feldman. I remember him to this day. And I did well in the class and couldn't wait for the class. And so when it came time to choose a college major, I thought, well, criminal justice, more of those law classes that I enjoyed. And sure enough, I enrolled as a criminal justice major, and the rest is history. Mm-hmm. So
But you didn't, for instance, that course did not necessarily incline you to consider the law.
Yeah, I elected criminal justice and wasn't sure where that would bring me. Mm-hmm. I know I was a student crossing guard at Pierce School at Park Ave Extension at Blossom Street as a elementary school kid as well. So maybe that had some influence on my becoming a police officer. But that's really how it all sort of unfolded.
Mm-hmm. And how did what was the Arlington Police Department like at that time? And specifically thinking about what were the kinds of issues that seemed to be of greatest concern to the community and to the APD as you were coming in 33 years ago?
Yeah, well, starting as a cop in the 80s was, drastically different, very reactive approach to policing. Just wait for the radio call, go out, deal with the issue at hand, and very little sort of data analysis went into policing at that time. And so I've been fortunate in my career to see the evolution of policing from a very reactive approach to a really sophisticated, proactive, data-driven approach to policing over that 33 years.
Mm-hmm. And how did your own, what was the progression of your own career within the department? Obviously, you start out, you're a cop on the beat, right? And
right.
How did things go from there?
So I was a beat cop in neighboring Concord when I first got on the police department. Sort of worked my way up the ranks and was appointed chief here in Arlington in 1999.
I see. So until you were chief, you were in either the Concord department or another one?
I was in the Concord department up to the rank of deputy chief of police.
I see.
And in 1999, there were some troubling times for the Arlington Police Department with some employee misconduct that resulted in the town manager at that time seeking a leader from outside of the agency. Mm-hmm. And I was recruited to come in at that time.
And I assume that you had been born and raised in Arlington, as you already alluded to, through Arlington High School. And then had you continued to live here in Arlington even while working in Concord, or did you?
I did for a portion of the time, yes, and wound up marrying a woman from Concord, so you know, that worked out well for me. But you know, when I took over in Arlington, it was a challenging time. You know, the community was questioning the integrity of the department as a whole, and there was a lack of trust among the community for its police department. So there was a lot of work to be done at sort of re-engineering the department and moving in the right direction. And I knew that it would be a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah.
And I was only 36 years old at the time when I was appointed police chief.
Right, and that's, I would assume, on the young side for a police chief. I have to say, you'll have an opportunity, audience, to see a picture that depicts the chief's wife pinning that badge
We look like kids.
on you. And yeah, it looks, you both look wonderful, but also you know, very young to consider that you walked into what is a tough, sounds like a very difficult situation as a relatively young man. How much do you, looking back on it, do you feel like you had an idea about what you were going to do, or how much did it, you know, you walked into the department that first day and just started to figure things out?
Yeah, it was more the latter, actually. I knew that, you know, it was a long-term project, and changing the culture of an organization was not going to occur overnight. You know, I often say adaptive leadership is about disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb, meaning slow incremental change would get us to what our vision was for the culture and performance of the Arlington Police Department. And so we worked with the strategic planning committee and started building some of those long-term goals. And sort of re-engineered the way we were structured at that time. We added a professional standards division, a division that's actually stood up to police the police, basically, to hold ourselves accountable, and all of the policies and programming and accreditation standards that meet national standards. And so, you know, we re-engineered at that time, and then let our long-range planning take its course. And thankfully, due to the good work of the men and women of the department that participated in that strategic planning process, it set us on a good course. And thankfully, due to their hard work, we were able to sort of rebuild that trust in the community that was so important and that really had been lost.
Yeah, and obviously that is one of the hallmarks, I think, that anybody would acknowledge in looking at the Arlington Police Department as you will be leaving it. The state in which you are leaving it is one in which it is very clear that public trust in the institution is very high within the community of Arlington. Some of the other aspects of it that are quite distinctive are how data-driven the programs and the work and your approach to things has been. A real sense that there's a kind of you're a proactive presence in the community. Are all those things things that you had in mind, were part of the vision, you know, that you can remember from your first days and months as the chief?
Clearly, the trust piece was really, you know, our North Star. You know, we just had to rebuild that community trust, and the only way you do that is by being honest. We oftentimes say here at APD, you know, transparency is important because it breeds self-correcting behavior. And so if we're comfortable exposing our flaws and being honest about them, then we have the wherewithal to correct those flaws.
Okay.
And in doing so, you build trust.
Right.
And that humility, you know, I've said several times recently, you know, I've never been perfect. This police department has never been perfect. But we've always been honest, and we've always strived for excellence. And so, you know, that was really the cornerstone of our strategic plan moving forward.
Well, actually, as you have brought it up, I want to ask one of the tougher questions around, and that is, you've mentioned that flaws have been exposed over, and obviously over a 19-year tenure, as you've enjoyed as chief of this department, there have been some tough times within that time as well. What, if any, among those kind of stand out for you as particularly difficult things that you've had to deal with, and and how do you feel about how those things played out in the end?
Yeah, probably the most high-profile one was an Arlington police officer that was collecting exotic animals and actually had rattlesnakes in his basement in his home, which is unlawful for obvious reasons. And he was bitten by one of those snakes, and that led to a series of events where the snakes went missing temporarily, and we had to face the community and say, this is one of our own, but we are committed to policing our own. We wrote a search warrant on that officer's home and searched the home, and did a very thorough investigation that resulted in the apprehension of the snakes at somebody else's home. They had been relocated intentionally to try to compromise our investigation. But that was an example where we called a meeting at the high school and we laid it right out to the community. Said, we're embarrassed by this, but we're going to be honest about it. We're not going to call in some state or federal agency to police the police. We are going to police ourselves. And we did so, and that officer was terminated, and the matter was resolved. And I think while it was a troubling situation, particularly troubling to the neighbors of that officer, not knowing where these dangerous animals were, the fact that we were honest and the fact that we did police ourselves honestly and ethically, I think helped. It took a bad situation, but we were able to demonstrate that we had the wherewithal to police ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example of the fact that push comes to shove. You can talk all you want about transparency and honesty, but when you have to admit that whatever the problem is, it started or includes an internal component, and you've got to come clean with that. That's a different order of magnitude, for that kind of thing, I think. And reminds me of the fact that in general, as already mentioned, there's been a sea change in the department, not only in its relationship with the community, but also in the culture that you've inculcated within the department itself. This is a different police department, I think most people would say, than the one that you took over in 1999. How has that been for you?
Well, again, changing that culture was done slowly and incrementally, and frankly, with attrition as well. But with that attrition, we re-engineered our training approach. In fact, we scrapped our old field training officer program because we learned we were training Joe Fridays. And if new cops are like puppy dogs. They'll do what you train them to do. And we were training them to be Joe Fridays, and they were going out in the community and performing like Joe Friday. So we scrapped that and went to a...
and just for our audience members, because there might be a few who actually don't know who Joe Friday is. Do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit on what you're talking about?
Just a police character, very businesslike, yes ma'am, no ma'am, very robotic in his approach to policing. And so we sent our field training officers down to the Southern Police Institute down south and re-engineered our training approach. So, and that's but one example of many of how we really tackled that us versus them. The other example I like to give is our building. Our building was designed in the 70s with civil defense dollars. It looked and functioned like a fort, and it gave the image that we were at war with our community. It drove us nuts. And so the Capital Planning Committee and the Finance Committee were great. We worked with actually a local architect, Eric Amundsen, and we tackled that problem. And today we feel like it's a more welcoming and light, bright, and airy place to do business. And so there were a lot of things that were contributing to an us versus them style of policing, and we scrapped most of those, including our physical environment, to be more welcoming to the community and more illustrate a partnering approach to policing rather than an us versus them approach to policing.
Yeah, I just want to make note on that topic, that as we sit here in the community room at the new, no longer new police station, but I am reminded of the fact of the opportunity I had a few years ago to sit in this room and have the police department opened to me. This through the community
Citizen Police Academy.
The Citizen Police Academy, which in which you invite 20 members from the community to come every week for a while, and it seemed, I can attest to the fact that it felt to us. I was in the first of these classes, but it felt to us as if, okay, we were getting the real scoop. It does add to that sense that you were just describing, of feeling like this is a partnership in a sense, that you're not doing things out of our sight.
Right. It's among one of our most important programs, and the value-added benefit to it is the team that puts that program on. They take it very seriously, do a great job, but it's fun watching them putting their PowerPoints together, leading up to the classes, and the sense of camaraderie, and it's among our most important programs because you and your classmates and the subsequent classes become diplomats in the community for the police department, and I'm glad to hear that was your experience. I know the team takes it very seriously.
You just said that's one of your most important programs. Okay, so looking back on, again, 33 years of public service, but specifically focusing on the 19 years here at the APD for you, what are the other programs that you point to or would point to and say, yeah, that if I'm gonna talk about a legacy, I want people to be looking at this and this.
Yeah, well, clearly, our work in behavioral health and substance abuse have been our most critical work and programs in the recent past, and last 2 years, life expectancy in America went down 2 years in a row for the first time since World War II, and that's attributed to suicide and addiction. And so, we've recognized that and stood up our programs and partnered with Arlington's Health and Human Services, Arlington Youth Consultation Center, and others. And in 2009, we brought in our first clinician embedded into the police department to help us deal with citizens who are wrestling with behavioral health issues in the healthcare setting rather than the criminal justice setting. And that program and the work that has flowed from that program is probably what I'm most proud of. I hear on the radio officers all the time calling and say, do we have a clinician available to get out to this scene? And so we're handling situations where people are in crisis with mental health issues in a far more empathetic and sophisticated manner than we used to. I mean, a lot of times, police officers would just arrest people for minor offenses to restore order. And so we train all of our police officers in mental health first aid. We train them in de-escalation skills. We have our clinicians available to co-respond with police officers. Our arrests have gone down, and so has the crime rate. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a good place to live, is where arrests are going down, and as is crime. And so, we've made mistakes along the way. We've learned from those mistakes. We've refined our program, and it's now seen as a model around the country.
you've mentioned, what, in a general sense, what things were like when you came on as chief, and that sounds like it was a crisis point of sorts for the department. Now you're leaving it in much, much, much better shape, obviously, than you found it. What do you think, though? What would you say to your successor if you had an opportunity to talk to him or her? What would you counsel them might be the biggest challenges that they'll be facing over the next little while?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my initial counsel would be humble with the community. Be approachable. People want to know and touch and love their police chief. Give the community that opportunity, because if you do, they'll support you. And after you build those relationships, establish your own vision. As I said, I've never been perfect, and I'm sure that I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. Seize those opportunities to establish your new vision and bring this organization to the next level. We've done a lot of great work. We're not perfect. There's a lot more work to be done, and continue that momentum. And I would fall back on the notion I mentioned earlier about leadership is about disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb. So
I'm sure you will be passing that
yes.
on to the next chief, without a doubt. Yeah. How about, though, as you look at Arlington, as you consider things in this area and this region, what do you think are the big challenges for the Arlington Police Department going forward and its leader?
Yeah, well, I think the operational override that's in the future is huge. Obviously, the manager and his team have done a fabulous job at
extending the last override, right?
And we've always been very fiscally cautious. The manager holds us very accountable around our budgeting issues and so forth. Mm-hmm. So I think leveraging the trust that we've built to communicate back out to our taxpayers that this structural deficit that we have, and educating people around that, mm-hmm. and the importance of another operational override to be able to continue to sustain the programs and the quality of life in the community is critically important. Mm-hmm. And so I think the next chief is going to have to work with the management team, and our managers already talking about consistent messaging and a good team approach to tackling that issue, because frankly, if that doesn't occur, there'll be a major impact to the police department and some of the work that we do.
How important do you think it could be to ensure or try to that whoever comes in your position next has some familiarity with Arlington already? Is that, how important is that?
I guess I'll let the manager make.
Right,
make,
of course.
those,
I understand
yeah.
that you're, and again, I'm not asking you for a recommendation, an endorsement of anything in particular, but just, thinking about, again, your own tenure here, how, and you know many other police chiefs in many other communities. I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations. In a general sense, how important is it for somebody to already have a feel for whatever the community is that they're going to be coming into? Or is that something you just learn as you go? And
yeah, I mean, I guess in the sort of pie of what are the skill sets that are necessary, that's a critical one, obviously. But whoever it is, if they're from Albuquerque or they're from Arlington, I'm not going far, and I intend to be right by that person's side during any transition to ensure that all the important work that we've done continues in the right direction, and then sort of wean myself away from the organization. But I've communicated to the manager that I'm committed to helping whoever he appoints succeed.
Mm-hmm. Right, so you will be available for consultation, and your long years of experience, you can bring, that perspective and that sense of counsel to your successor. That's
To
reassuring.
the extent that they want it.
That they want it, exactly. I'm sure that you will wait to be invited for your.
I'll buy the coffee.
Wait until your input is invited. Yes, I understand. So you just said you will be around, and we know that you're retiring, and we know that you are still a young man, relatively speaking. So what does the future hold for you?
Yeah, well, I'm retiring from law enforcement, but I do intend to stay in the workforce, and I'm exploring some private sector opportunities. I do want to stay in the behavioral health and substance use space, and it's the biggest issue compromising communities across America. I've become passionate about that work, and I hope to continue to work in that space in some capacity in the private sector.
And how does it feel? Because it sounds like you are definitely concentrating your efforts at the moment at looking at private sector opportunities. Right. How does it feel to be, moving out of the public sector after a work lifetime spent in it?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I was with family on Christmas Eve, and they started asking me to tell stories, crazy stories from over the years, and we had a few laughs. But, although difficult and challenging, moving away from my identity as it has been for the past 3 decades, I'm ready. This is a young person's job. It's a lifestyle more than a career. I mean, it's truly 24/7. The phone is always on the bedside table, rings morning, noon, and night, and that's okay. That's what the job is. That's what I signed up for. But at some point in one person's life and career comes the time to move on, and now is the time. And I think it's good for the organization. Change is good, and people will be able to grow within the organization. And it's good for the community. Nearly 20 years is having the same police chief. While it does have a lot of benefits, as I've said several times, I'm not perfect. So it will create opportunities for hopefully future growth for the department and the community as a whole.
Well, I am sure that your family both got and deserves the best of the stories that you told.
There's some good ones.
But I'd like to ask you to, are there a couple of stories, crazy, funny, very memorable, that you can share with us?
Well, I guess a crazy one would be, I was right here in my office one afternoon, and I tend to stand when I'm on the telephone. And the office has windows facing Mystic Street as well as our parking lot. And traveling inbound on Mystic Street was a red pickup truck traveling at a very high rate of speed. I mean, I estimated it to be about 55 miles an hour here on Mystic. And I looked out, and Cruiser 353 was just pulling out of the parking lot. So I got onto the radio and said, 353, try to catch up to that pickup truck headed inbound and get it stopped before there's a crash. Unfortunately, moments later, the dispatcher came on the air, and there was, in fact, a crash just down here at what we call the Thousand Islands down by St. Agnes. And the pickup truck had caused a crash. I was in a suit and tie, and I jumped into my car and went down there. I was a little ticked off that this person was wreaking havoc on our roadways, and he had rear-ended a woman who had children in the car and pushed her into another car. And so fortunately we stabilized with no serious injuries, and I and one of the officers walked over to the pickup truck to further our investigation, and we asked a gentleman to step out of the truck. Now I'm 6'3", and I looked up at this guy, and he was at least 6'6", I think closer to 6'7", a former professional wrestler, and who was severely under the influence of alcohol and drugs. and he had no intention of coming into police custody willingly. The crazy and funny part of it was I was wearing a tie, as you are, and you know, we wear clip-ons for a reason, because those ties can be used against you. This young man got a hold of my tie and started whipping me around like a rag doll. But our great firefighters and one of the other police officers quickly came to my aid, and we were actually able to take him into custody without injury, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, quite a feat, as it turned out.
Given how violent he was. But you know, that's, you know.
Good thing you had a bunch of friends with you, huh?
The firefighters were my friends that day.
And anything else that's kind of, you just, we don't have many opportunities, we've got none left to hear from you. So with that in mind, I was just wondering if there's anything else that kind of comes to mind that you could share with us.
Funny.
Could be.
You know, I got a call from the library director one day that I was in my office, and she called and said, Fred, we have a problem at the library. I said, what's that, Mary Ellen? And she said there are a young man and a young woman having sex in the circulation area. And so I said, I'm not sure that's criminal, but we will send a police officer to help restore order in the library. So we were able to restore order. So.
Restore circulation, so to speak. As you look back, I've asked you to think about, you know, how things were when you first became a police officer. As you look back on the changes that have happened over these 3+ decades, and from your vantage point now, what would you say either to yourself, that young man just joining the force, or to somebody else, young man or woman who is joining the force at the moment? What are the words that you would share with them?
Yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts. You know, one is we take an oath of office when we're sworn in as a police officer, and while in many ways it's symbolic in the raising of the right hand, those words are very, very important. And so to live and perform your duties pursuant to that oath every day is critically important, because the work that we do is so important to the community, and anything that could compromise that trust that the community places in the police is serious misconduct. So that oath of office is very important. And then the other thing is, what we've learned is that our criminal justice system and society as a whole tends to dehumanize people. We put people in categories, and you know, maybe for systems reasons that's explainable, but it's always sort of sent me into orbit, you know, labeling this one a felon and that one a junkie and this one a dirtbag. And don't dehumanize people. Every human life has value. We don't get to assign the value of one person's life over another person's life, and to treat every human being with the dignity and respect and the rights and compassion that they deserve. And that's, if you conduct yourself that way, your career will go just fine.
As mentioned, you're looking forward, and understandably so, to not being on 24/7, to being able to actually turn your phone off, say, et cetera. What else? I know you're going to be busy in a new job whenever you choose what that will be, but clearly you should have, one hopes, a little bit more time for other endeavors coming up. So what are you hoping to be spending some more free time doing?
Well, although I love golf, I'm horrible at it. So I hope to have more time to improve my golf game and get off the tee a little more consistently and staying in play. And you know, a round of golf takes a lot of time. So I hope to improve my golf game substantially, because it needs improvement.
And you're alone there, and hoping that that's part of your retirement,
Right.
or semi-retirement, clearly. Now, golf is something that will take the time and justify the time, I hope and assume, for you. you know, as we close this interview and as you close your tenure, I wanted to invite you to just address the community. What is it that you would like to say as parting words, at least as far as ACMi is concerned, to the community of Arlington?
Well, you know, I've enjoyed our partnership, and clearly communicating out to the citizenry is critically important to our mission. And I want to thank you and the team at ACMi. We've had a lot of great conversations, and we as an organization appreciate that. In terms of the community, I say thank you. Thank you for entrusting me with your police department, with allowing me to take risk from time to time, for allowing me to make mistakes and getting up and brushing our self off and get back to the mission at hand. And thank you for supporting the men and women of the police department, because the work that they do, there's no time in the history of policing than being a police officer is more difficult than today. And there are many valid reasons for that. But decisions that police officers have to make in a split second in a volatile situation that they've been injected into oftentimes get analyzed and broken down into milliseconds for days, weeks, months, and years that follow. So, support the men and women. The overwhelming majority, I think every last one that we have employed in Arlington, are well-intentioned, hard-working police officers who will always strive to do the right thing, but we do get injected into chaotic situations from time to time, and support them as they perform those difficult duties. And I think if you support them, it pays back dividends.
Well, I've been putting this off as long as I could, but I guess it is time to wrap up the interview, to thank for the hours that you have spent with us, and for the years and decades that you've spent at work in this community and in Concord, in the region. I know that your work is not yet done. We are sorry to see you go. We're happy for you, and we're hopeful that the good work that you have kind of engendered will continue. But we wish you, obviously, the very, very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
And maybe we'll have you back again in
For the
another
ACMi golf tournament.
There you go. Take care.
Thank you.
For Arlington Community Media, for Talk of the Town, I'm James Milan. This has been an interview with Chief Fred Ryan as he is moving on. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time.